Bye-bye.
Okay, Senate Education Committee, May 2nd, about 2 o'clock, after a little bit longer than normal floor. We are today here with some working on H454 with the latest draft and some hope of actually voting the bill today. So we have, we're going to start with let Councilor St. James, who to be with us until 4, just as a marker. I think we'll get it, but just as a marker to 4, and then we'll go to Ezra from JFO, who has done some slightly different what we've seen based a little bit on what we heard yesterday, and then John has put together some language for the second half of the bill form. Okay, so we'll start with Beth, who's joining us.
Can I just ask for a question?
Yeah.
Is someone from AOE here? Okay.
No.
Okay.
So that's the let council speak there. You have to say that for let council. If you don't know. Okay.
But I'm gonna forget when I.
Understood. So a couple of, maybe I'll just set this up a little bit. A lot of work last night and this morning. What we heard from the agency yesterday, well, we're taking a little bit of what we heard from the agency yesterday, taking a couple of key things for the committee to know as we go into this, that we're not going forward with trying to do weights, sticking with the draft sticks with the census block grant, and with some language in the intent section about making that a job specifically referenced for work that get done in 2026. And
so they get done CTV, not weights for CTV,
not weights. So both CTE and the weights for special ed work that's done that we're headed toward. This draft references that, and so I think sort of there's a couple of other things that whoever can form the language of a few things that we picked up yesterday. So with that.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm going to share my screen. So you all should have draft 8.1 with today's date on it. And this is the first time you're seeing the language that I am responsible for and that John is responsible for in one bill. So this is all of your language for H454. So the first changes from yesterday appear on page 1 to the intent section, section 1. So again, new language or change language is highlighted in yellow. And so section 1 remains an intent section, but we're adding some new intent language starting on line 16. So in the 2026 session, it is the General Assembly's intent to enact updates to CTE governance systems, both at the local and statewide levels, that are reflective of the larger public education governance transformation, create a coordinated and coherent statewide strategy for career and technical education that is responsive to students and the state workforce needs. I'm on page 2 now. And that provides opportunities for more integration between CTE and traditional high school work. Enact student-centered updates to career and technical education funding within a foundation formula that does not create competition between sending schools and CTE programs for available funds. And enact updates to special education funding to move from a census block grant to a weight for special education within the foundation formula. And then everything else in the intent section remains the same. And then the next changes occur on page 36. Section 13, line 9. Again, this is some slight changes based on testimony you heard yesterday from Oliver Olson. Phil Auger, you're sitting right there. Related, so again, this is the tuition to approved school statute. And on lines 20 on page 36 and 2 on page 37, changing that date of when a school district was operating, when a school needed to be in a school district that was operating or not operating grades, or supervisory union not operating, from July 1, 2025 to July 1, 2024.
You get 24.
Right, so it's changing from July 1, 2025 to July 1, 2024.
Yeah.
Yep, in both sections. And then on page 37, lines 17 through 19, this is the language you all were considering regarding out-of-state independent schools that are able to accept public tuition. And the only change here, again, is on line 17 and 19, and that is that the school is required to have had at least one or more Vermont resident students enrolled in grades 9 through 12 on a district-funded tuition basis pursuant to Chapter 21 of Title 16 during the 23-24 school year. That replaces the language about the 25%, the analogous language on line 4 of that same page, 25% enrollment of district funded students. And then the last change. John, do you want me to do tuition?
That would be great.
Okay. So John and I have been batting these middle sections back and forth, and so today I'm going to be responsible for that. On page 48. Section 21. This is the tuition section. The amendment to requiring essentially that the money follow the student. This language actually hasn't changed, right? On lines 11 through 16.
That's the concept that was in the House version, and we'd initially seen the economic composition one, but this is, yep,
Okay.
should be adopted.
Okay, so this is the same. So for tuition, whether it's a public school or an independent school, the district shall pay to a receiving school an amount equal to the base amount multiplied by the sum of one in any weights applicable to the resident student for each resident student attending the receiving school. The change here is on page 16. I'm sorry, 49, line 16. Adding language that says, notwithstanding subsection A, which is what I just read, the district shall pay the full tuition charged to students attending an approved independent school in Vermont, functioning as an approved area career technical center. This language takes the place of the change to the CTE statute that we looked at yesterday. That section has been removed from the bill. And this language would allow an approved independent school located in Vermont that is functioning as an approved area career technical center, and there are only 2 of them right now, to, instead of just accepting whatever money follows the student, it would allow them to do what's allowed under current law, which is pay the full, charge the full tuition, and then the district would be required to pay the full tuition that the school is charging. And then the repeals remain the same, related to conforming amendments related to the tuition program. And those are the only changes in the policy section that I was responsible for.
Oh, I was just on page 53 trying to make sure I understood.
I am not on page 53, I am on page 42.
Oh, for some reason I thought you were like done.
Yeah.
You're just done with that page. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
That was something that John will take over.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Question on 2026 session. Are we trying to answer the supplemental spending issue now or in 2026?
That will be up to the finance committee. Nothing to that. We're not doing anything with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then a quick question on the CTEs from the two. I guess it's usually a standard charge that they have so that, could spike. They can't spike, inflate the cost at all. How's that work to make sure that don't happen when you say, hey, we will pay that tuition?
We'll have, if it's okay, have Laura Felicity answer that question
Sure.
or something.
Laura Felicity, I represent the St. Johnsbury Academy. So under current law and under state board rule, the two comprehensive high schools cannot charge a separate CTE tuition. They have to charge one tuition. So right now, their total comprehensive tuition is about $3,000. So that entitles a student who comes to everything, including CTE. So that's why it's a little bit
So-
different than public CTE.
Okay.
The goal is just to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to discuss. You know how that sometimes can work. It's good.
Yes.
Sprinkled through the document up to the sections which, the city of James has are references to supervisory unions. And I'm wondering if we want to retain any supervisory union language in that we're shifting to districts and potentially supervisory districts. I think supervisory unions is a holdover. I'm not sure that's intentional.
No, it's intentional. It's intentional to have it, be both because we'll have to sort that out with, having the governance because you remember we've had some testimony in about, just wanting to have supervisory units. And so we're not answering the question, we're just looking at the oral. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good with me?
Wonderful.
Great job.
Easy.
Great.
Sorry. Maybe it's the wrong section, but, money following the student. This section or the next?
Yep. That's actually where.
It's me.
So what's our intent? Does money follow the
Yes.
student 100%?
Yes.
Or does the district make decisions based on their priorities?
Well, you'll answer. I'll let you answer.
District, money follows the student for the purposes of tuition. So this bill doesn't change the mechanics of the town tuition program.
So I'm not really talking, I'm talking about in general.
weighting.
not Weighting. That's correct.
I'm not sure I understand. your
So
question.
say we give, we give all we,
Oh,
You do it.
there is nothing in this bill that dictates how a school district allocates the funds that it receives after their payment is calculated.
Okay. So it's left vague on purpose for the district to be able to decide how they prioritize the bucket of money.
Whether it's on purpose or not is a question, a policy question for you all.
And is that's something we can also go back and fix, correct?
There's some language somewhere that we did a little bit about intent or a study, I forget which to put it. There was, okay.
Study, but I was also okay just letting
Yeah,
it
okay.
go and looking at it again. Once the maps are clearer.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I
No,
think
Jeff,
it
Jeff,
makes sense.
Jeff, stay there, stay there.
I'll just switch it to wherever that. That's okay.
I think it makes.
Oh, I thought you were like running out that door. No.
That's right. I would musical chairs.
He brings in.
Unless you.
Hello.
No, I'm fine, but
Thank you. All right. For the record, Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. And as soon as I get my computer logged back in, I will be ready to go.
So we have the scenario.
Yeah, so today I am here to present, as the chair mentioned at the beginning of the committee, a model scenario C that was worked on last night and this morning after hearing from the Agency of Education and having Chair Baumgartz give us some additional modeling parameters. So
Can I just clarify one thing? I was confused by the language on page 53. Is that? I didn't think, I thought whoever came up next was gonna pick up on the language we did.
John's gonna come back.
Oh, John's after.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, because this follows the weighting
Yeah.
and it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
So just to C is really a fairly, it ends up being a fairly modest, tweak with a picking up on a couple of things from the, if you look at and you're still not partisan.
Yes, we're JFO, we're still nonpartisan. Absolutely. We just gotta make sure everyone is at ease and knowing that we are here to provide some nonpartisan, unbiased fiscal analysis. So, and once again, we're still at 1.88 billion for that education payment. We're still using the terms long-term weighted ADM, FPL for economic disadvantage, and EL for your English learner students. So, again, the modeling uses fiscal year 2025 data and current law districts. And my model was built to hold the education payment at the fiscal year 2025 level. And that was that 1.88 billion we've referenced a few times in this committee. And the weights are designed to direct a portion of the designated base, not a set dollar amount, and they are all additive. All of this, I think, looks familiar. Here is the new stuff for you all. So scenario C is designed using some of the weights that were shown yesterday from the administration's and APA's enhanced evidence-based model. So we took some of those weights as directed by Chair Baumgartz and set the base so that we would still hit that 1.88 billion. And that was done also to keep with what we have been looking at in this committee, where you have current spending and everything that goes in it covered by the base instead of breaking it out into a few different categoricals. Like, so we're still excluding categoricals as we've discussed. There's still special ed as is with the census block grant, as well as expenditures that were already in a school's ed payment. Those are still being included in that 1.88 billion. So that part stays the same, but using some of these APA weights, except for the federal.
Sorry, I'm just seeking my folder.
Oh.
Got it. Thank you.
So the first change, however, here is your economic disadvantage. That was changed up to 1.02 instead of the 0.75. And also we eliminate the CTE weight and a weight for small schools with enrollment of 101 to 249, and applied all this to the current law districts. And as a reminder, as was shown yesterday, the grade weights are adjusted down to 0.02 and for grades 6 through 8 and 0.1 for grades 9 through 12 to be consistent with the model shown, or the number shown yesterday. And we're still operating with small school weight only applies to a small school within that sparse district. So that part is consistent with what you all have seen in this committee. So just
Small school can reference elementary, middle, high school. Correct?
yeah, so just to quickly show where we started, or I guess where we left off really, is scenario B 2.2. And so that was constructed using the H454 weights as passed by the House, constrained to the current education payment, that 1.88 billion figure, with added pupil grade weights for your 6th through 8th graders received that 0.08, and then your 9th through 12th graders were receiving the 0.12 and no sparsity, and applied all this to current law districts. And so that's what we've been looking at in this committee. 14,698 was your base, and these weights generated the 127,951 long-term weighted ADM. And just as a reminder, that's the number that is driving your base funding to a district. So more long-term weighted ADMs means that more funding would go to that district, because that's what your base that you'll see on the handouts is being multiplied against. And so yesterday, and this is all just for some comparisons, since this is or some reference, since this is the most recent model that I believe the committee has seen, we tried to pull together a table summarizing APA's enhanced ED model. And so this model utilizes some revised weights, and when I mean revised, I mean they're not the same as what we've been looking at previously. So this is a separate system, and also a bit of a revision from the original evidence-based model. However, you all have already heard about that from the agency, so we won't rehash it with me, because that's not why I'm here. And they also, another difference between that and B 2.2 is an expansion of the small school weight for enrollments of 101 through 249. This model proposed using a variable weight based on the enrollment to attempt to do like a smooth landing instead of having a cliff. And also an addition of a CTE weight. So you'll see that the base figure used here was 14,683. And with a 0.75 economically disadvantaged weight, so that would be the same body of students as your FPL weight of 1.02 from B 2.2 when you're looking at the two. EL, same body of students, 1.4 here, and then you can see that for college, their grade weight is really assigned for college and career readiness, but it applies to the same pool of pupils as you would see in 2.2. So your grade 6 through 8 get a separate weight from your 9 through 12 students. And also this model also assumes a litany of policy changes, which we're not going to talk about right now. We're just talking about bases and weights, but this is a package deal compared, it's a different package compared to what we've been discussing in this committee with B 2.2. So that leads us to scenario C, which the chair directed me to model, kind of taking bits from both of those. So that's why I thought it'd be helpful to look at 2.2 and then the APA, and now you have this scenario. So again, APA weights were plugged in, were used here. However, you'll notice that we made some changes that were plugged in here. So for example, your FPL, remember that's economically disadvantaged, is now the 1.02 from model 2B 2.2 instead of that 0.75. The EL, both of the grade weights, those are the same as those are the APA weights, no editing there. The small school weight for under 100 is the same in both models. However, we were directed to remove that small school weight for between 101 and 250 pupils. And there's still no sparsity here. I don't believe either model had sparsity contemplated in them. And then all of this was applied to current law districts. And so that generates,
I need some clarity on how this has all been applied. Because the last thing I remember before yesterday, we had left the language on English learners as a sliding scale in the bill, but we were using 1.39 as a proxy. Is this still the same calculation? here, but just with 1.4? Or did we flatten that in some other way?
Sure, so that's a good question. So the 1.39 number originated from the Dr. Colby and Dr. Baker memo, which had that sliding scale that you were speaking to, and it also had a flat single weight of 1.39.
Mhm.
We've been using that for modeling because due to Vermont's like demographics, you have a lot of suppression for your EL students because in a lot of these school districts, you only have a handful, and because of that, we can't actually see what scale, where they would be on that scale and how many there are exactly. So to account for that, we just chose to apply the flat weight to the entire population rather than make, assumptions about how many students would fit into each of those boxes. So that's why the flat 1.39 was used for our modeling. The 1.4 was not a calculation that we performed. That was a modeling directive from the chair to use that APA 1.4. I think the idea is, they're practice when you're looking at just these weighted numbers on their own, 1.39 rounds to. Well, I don't want to speak for the chair's thought process for that, but I will note that
Yeah.
that 1.4 is not the same as the 1.39 from a calculation perspective, right?
Mhm.
Because Dr. Colby calculated the 1.39 and APA calculated 1.4. So they had
Mhm.
two different authors behind those numbers. So
Okay.
as to the exact calculation, I can't speak to that, but for intent.
Okay. I think then it's a question for ledge council. On page 56 and not.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
if it applies to some of that language in there, I certainly would not
Yeah.
attempt to answer for that.
Like, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But again, so the 1.4, is the 1.4 simply the average of, is it the 6 tiers? Or is it the actual average of all of the English language learners in the state?
So the 1.4 from the APA model, or okay, yeah. So the 1.4 from the APA model, I can't speak to how that was calculated. That was calculated by AOE and APA. I haven't had the opportunity to sit down and speak with them about how that one was calculated. I know the 1.39, and I know that they're so close. It's really
Yeah, I'm not really worried about whether it's 1.40 or 1.39.
Sure.
I'm worried about, I'm curious about whether it's the average of the tiers, just straight average of the tiers, or if it's the average of the cost for the actual number of students that are in the state to give us a today cost.
Sure.
Wait, no.
Sure. So from what I recall, the 1.39 was calculated to generate the approximate same a number of dollars through the cost function model as using the scale when applied to the whole system. That's my recollection of
Good.
of that.
Thank
you. All right, so you'll see that I believe as we're discussing with these weights, you've generated a different long-term weighted ADM figure of 126,433 students with the weight, with the base of 14,870 landing at that 1.88056 number, which comes in a bit below what you saw in when you're not rounding, what you saw with the B 2.2, right? They both would round to about the same place, but you'll notice if you go all the way through, you're coming in about 500,000 less. So just flagging that you will see a slight difference there, but essentially you're at the same place.
And the base number here is what's up. It's
Yes.
Quick question. I'm looking at the chart that you provided, the scenario C, like the current law districts sorted by county. There's no total at the bottom as compared to the several other charts that we've received. Is that just a type A, or is there,
So that's a great
or am I
question.
missing something?
No, so that's a great question. So we presented the, so I've been in here a few times and we've gone through several handouts with those totals. However, we've received feedback, for example, Chair Baumgart's pointed out that one of these counties contained a district to Conic and Green that was coded in the data from the agency as belonging to one county. However, most of the district is within another county, and we've had similar feedback from other individuals. So to avoid that confusion of people having, well, the district is coded to this county, however, there's towns that go across lines. So if a district crosses lines, we felt that it would be clearer to not try and put maybe I shouldn't say clear, but we felt that it was perhaps because of the amount of feedback we were getting, we felt that we were maybe putting out, or that the data was confusing based on how some of these districts were coded in one area by the agency, but then we hear someone else say, no, look at the towns. And so that's why we decided to remove it, because of that feedback we received.
Thank you.
Yes.
So you're just not giving us an average. It's all that stupid, right?
Well, I think the fear was that the average wouldn't be accurate.
Right. Going back to like it was a 12% increase in Vermont, but depending where you were in Vermont, it was more, some places were more, some places were less.
If the only example had been Taconic and Green, that would have been one thing, but if that was Taconic and Green being put in Rutland County rather than Bennington County, despite that's where 95% of the kids are, distorted the Bennington County number by a factor of almost double digits.
Mhm.
And that happened other places. So we realized it really just doesn't tell you anything.
Mhm. So we thought it would be better, more accurate going forward to just not have those totals at the bottom. But if you wanted to add up the amounts, you could do that for your own kind of comparison between the models. However, again, we were receiving feedback that some towns and some districts cross county lines, and so they felt, and the feedback was that, well, perhaps they're in the wrong county, and so we did for that reason. So on the consideration side, we've touched on these considerations a few times before. Estimates only reflect how different base and weight decisions would affect funding under the constraint of current education payment, and they don't reflect any other research on appropriate funding levels. We're not applying ourselves evidence-based or cost function right here, right? We're just using modeling with a constraint of total spending to keep it flat fiscal year 2025. And also, this does not include any supplemental district spending, and it does not include categorical aid in here at all. So those still exist in the, as they do in the Ed Fund Outlook for categorical aid. And yes, that's
To data check. So in the printout by district, is it accurate that a couple of these districts have 1 student, 4 student, 8 student in the district?
so some of these are actually GORs, for example, but they're coded as being independent districts. And I believe that is something that has been spoken to in here about why the construct matters when talking about supplemental spending, because you have district, like just grabbing the first one, Ferdinand it's listed as having 4. So if you set that as its own district when talking about supplemental spending, they only have 4 kids, so they can only raise 10% off of 4 kids. So yes, that is one of the limitations of the current system, and the language as it relates to that.
Just want to make sure it wasn't a type of
No, it's
on this.
Yeah, it's a great catch. Yeah, that's absolutely, yes. Fuel score is another one that's on the smaller side as well, but I'm sure you probably come across that one too. Anything further from you, Chair?
I don't see anything. So, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Let's switch to John and then pick up on page, whatever it is, 50 or 53, whatever it is.
Look at, someone said, one.
Yeah.
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will screen share, starting with my sections. I am on page 50. So we're looking at the chapter of Title 16 that covers state funding of public education. I can just hit the highlighted sections of, for efficiency purposes. But I know there were a couple of questions that have already come up, so I can hopefully address those once we get to them. The first change you're going to see is to the base amount on page 51. It's picking up that $14,870 figure that you've just seen from Ezra in that scenario C.
That basis a couple $100 higher than what we had in the right? About 200, yeah.
Okay. So on page 52, we get into the kind of core of implementing this scenario C. This is your section 24, your weighting section. And just try to orient you guys, as you'll remember, this section is divided into a counting section that tallies up the pupils that fall within particular categories, and then it applies particular weights to the counts within those categories. And you're going to see concepts twice. So what you see at the bottom of page 52 is you're counting your grade levels. You're going to use those to apply your 6 through 8 and your 9 through 12 weights. You're seeing your same economic disadvantage weight. That's 185% of FEL. You're seeing a flat EL pupil. I think this is an earlier question. If there was any distinguished categories within EL, this is just a flat, aligning with that scenario C. And I do have
So my understanding most of the time was that somewhere this tiered proposal existed in the language and we were just using 1.39 or 1.4 as a calculating proxy.
So I think that would be I know that there was discussion earlier this week and potentially appetite to do I recall the discussions that maybe you could do this and use a proxy. The direction I received was just to use the 1.4. So I have a flat figure here. I don't know if it would require additional work to distinguish between different categories of EL, but that
Didn't
We put.
it come over from the house with
the house does,
tier?
and I can show you that if you're interested in seeing it. But
Thought so, but yeah, I thought we were interested.
We just took, well, let's work on page 2.
On page 2.
We had, it doesn't answer your question.
Oh,
But line 7, we did put in, this is for the work to be done in 26.
for special ed.
Yeah. So you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about English learners.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The English learners
Okay.
came over from the house with tiers.
Oh, right.
My sense all along was that we were endorsing the tiers because they matter and they're more precise. And then we were using 1.39 or 1.4 as a proxy while we calculated the general impact, even though that's hard to do because it affects different
Yeah.
districts very differently. That was my understanding. Thank you for nodding.
Okay. So what does that mean for language?
I can show you what the house has, and if there's appetite to do this, I just drop this in.
Okay.
So fortunately, I have it open with exactly this. So what you would see is in your definition section, the addition of these two pieces. Your English language proficiency level, which is the set of 6 different English language proficiency levels, and then that newcomer SLIFE, the limited or interrupted formal education. Those would be used in your counts. So I would have to update this section as well. The piece that we were just looking at, where just at the flat EL pupils, you would drop in these subdivisions 2 and 3. And then I would just have to make the update to the weighting section, like the actual application of the weights. And it would look like this. So this is what it would look like for the proficiency levels. And this is what it would look like for the newcomer level or life. So if there's appetite to do that, I can do that. I would just need a little time to add everything. So
I've got no objection. That's okay.
So we go from the 139 to this,
No.
this,
I think the number would stay the same.
well, you would have to have a different number. I mean, that's
But-
what the, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
It just what's being suggested is that the number that was used was for modeling purposes. It was a proxy to get the cost because it would be too difficult essentially to do all the differentiated categories. But that you would actually be dropping in these weighting sections that have distinguished weights like 2.11 for level 1, 1.41 for level 2 and 3. You wouldn't drop this in.
This is the more precise way to take a very new English learner and give them more resources than someone who's
Yeah.
almost
No, I
finished.
remember this.
Yeah.
So, but that changes the whole, does that change the whole modeling?
Do you want to speak? Yeah, Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. To Senator Hinsdale's point with the, like, using the proxy, JFO does not have the unsuppressed data that we would need in order to be able to model a tiered English learner weight. So all of the modeling up until before today was using the 1.39, which was also from the same cost factor analysis that came from Dr. Colby that presented the tiered weights. What we're looking at here is the one, not here, but on the,
House.
yeah, in scenario C is the 1.4, which is corresponding with the 1.4 flat weight that was presented by APA and AOE yesterday in the memo. The numbers are very close, which makes them seem as though they're the same, but the 1.39 came from the cost factor analysis, the 1.4 came from that.
And the modeling would look different depending on how high need your ELL students were in that particular district. Overall, this average weight was offered as a proxy for the whole system. But I'm proposing that we put back in the sliding scale for accuracy about how much a district per student's proficiency level.
and this is a little above the average would be 1.2.
Oh, the average, well,
Yeah, that's 1 point, that's how they must have got the 139.
but it's not, but it's, you have to weight the average by how many students are in each category.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but you could have, yes, depends, you could have
Right,
only 4 in 2.11 and
right.
6 in the,
But Buell score could have someone move in who's like at a level 5, and that would change their entire calculation because there's only 5 students, is what I'm saying. So the district numbers will fluctuate significantly based on who has higher need students.
So is this as simple, in fact, as just dropping this in?
I can look at something to put it in. It's not that I have to create something wholesale.
Okay.
So if folks want to do that, I can do that.
We can take the time to do it.
So, 2 questions. First, how often are the weights recalculated as far as the application to the district? Is it every year?
The weighting is a count each year.
Okay. And second, how long do we can, going down just a little bit on your screen, how long do students remain as new American?
That I don't know. That I don't know.
It's not in there.
Yeah.
If you include it, you need to be prescriptive. Is this a 1-year effect or a 2-year effect? That would slide by time. If it's 1 year, okay, the next year, got a new group of Americans, okay, good. You know, the number fluctuates. But if it's only 1 year, the student who was a student, new American last year doesn't
Yeah,
in the US.
I guess what I would offer here, while I can't speak to how within the education context folks understand the term new American, that count would be done each year. So if someone no longer met the educational usage of the term New American. They would need to take that.
Find that, it's really the question. If we include that as a unique factor and not sum it up into the 1.4, we need to figure out how long that lasts, how long that effect lasts.
And the way that it would work without adding anything is as long as the educational determination that they are a New American is in effect. So that's what's being picked up without language is you will be in or out based on the educational bucket, right? Which is, I think, what you're trying to get at is that you don't
How do we
accidentally.
guide that?
Oh, I think that's
I,
broader than the weights themselves. That's
Right,
Yeah.
it's related, so picking it up now before we work it out.
well, I, speaking entirely out of turn here, I don't know if somebody around the room has a better sense of this, but from my work in the city of Burlington, I would offer that the need is usually from having parents that are not English proficient. So you need some money to communicate with parents and caregivers and family members so they can do just as much to participate in their child's education success as parents who speak English. That's at least one of the things that's like a slight category thing, because they could reach English proficiency, but they still can't interpret for their parents. That's not legal under civil rights law.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. There are federal laws regarding EL services in the programs. And there are like pretty prescriptive checkpoints, and students are actually exited out of the program once they meet certain criteria. But that's all federal law and would be baked in by just referring to the fact that a student qualifies to these services.
So federal law is prescriptive on
On what the services
New
are,
American, I'm not talking about English language, I'm talking about the New American factor,
It-
the way.
isn't that part of the English learner
it
weight?
is part of the English learner weight.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
covered.
Yeah. The way to think about it is that English language learners, it picks up two different categories of things that you can receive. You can get weights based on your proficiency level. So that picks up a separate, the WIDA, or however to pronounce that acronym, set of tests that are out there. It picks up that. And similarly, within the English language learner space, there is this concept of newcomer or slave, and it picks up the federal law construct. So in both cases, it's an English language weight, but it's picking up existing systems outside of this. This is just referencing those things to
Okay,
provide.
so I'm not really tracking yet. So for every student has English language needs, we factor in what sums up to be 1.4. And then we add on top of that.
You would get-
0.42 on
Exactly.
every single one of those.
If
I'm asking.
if you fell into a particular language proficiency level category, and additionally, you are a newcomer or slave, let's say you're in category 1, you would pick up 2.11 plus 0.42.
But the 1.4 that we've been using as proxy included SLIC. Is
So
that
the
what-
1.4, the way that we've been discussing this just in this last 10 minutes is that the flat 1.4 you're receiving was a proxy for the full extent of English language level that you were getting at through the weighting system. So I think that's a fair characterization.
This isn't adding a new amount on top of what we've been considering in the generalized
That's right.
calculations. Is that what you're?
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the line.
So 1.4 includes language training and the newcomer factor.
Yes, the 1.4 is an alternative to having this broken. The way to think about it is in the Colby memo, right? You had a flat provided and you had this other differentiated set of factors provided.
Okay.
You folks want to jump in?
How really are here, JFO, one piece of context, in addition to everything that John is saying, the tiered English learner weights that we're looking at here that are from Colby's memo, as John was referencing, are based off of research that came from prior Colby study, which outlines the different categories, and that research, that report was then used to determine the tiered weights within the cost factor analysis. I can send that to Will. That'd be helpful to share with the committee, but it does include some of the underlying assumptions of what different student categories mean.
Jump back to the graph that we have, if that's.
Yeah.
We're good. So I'll come back and break out this EL people piece.
I think, oh, no, we're good. We're right up where I want it.
Yep. Next, you see highlighted language for identifying school districts that have low population density. You will note that this is not, the count that's being done here is not for the purposes of weighting, because you'll recall that scenario C doesn't include a sparsity weight. The reason that this is included here is because your small school weight is predicated on having a count of that fewer than 55. So you need to count this factor here. And so this is just the counting section. This is not a weighting section. You need to identify school districts that have low population density, and that's that fewer than 55 persons.
Okay, but
Yeah.
do we really need to know which districts have pockets of low population density, or do we really need to know what schools are in pockets of low density? Isn't that more important? Because we're going to deal with a district that's 4,000 to 30,000. What does this give us?
Right. No, I mean, I think that's a fair question to ask. What does sparsity mean at the district level if you suddenly have a significantly larger district configuration as against a small district configuration where the sparsity assessment of that tightly constrained area might be more reflective of the geographic conditions directly around the school. So I think it's a fair question to ask. Till we know what those boundaries are, it's hard to say what you should do, but you're correct to identify that you could propose alternative geographic areas to measure this density around. I would just offer that if people say school, you still have to specify a geographic area, right? Because a school is not a geographic area. You need to come up with what the construct that replaces the school districts are. So I think you're right to identify that it is what does it mean if you change your district configuration? But we would need to have a substitute geographic area to make the assessment.
So I believe finance is primed to look at this, because I think the big question here, I could be wrong, is that we didn't quite get at if the sparsity is related to the student in a tight geographic area within the district, or if the sparsity is related to the radius of the school. And it looks so different, because if you're averaging the sparsity of a whole county, that's really different than the sparsity of a district within the county. Does that make sense to people? Like in a census tract, I know I don't even think that's a good measure, but like a chunk, geographic chunk that's sparse is really different than averaging all the students over the square miles of an entire district. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah, right.
Sparsity will change based on the geographic boundaries you select.
So yeah, we don't have the people who wrote the original piece enough to know if we're choosing the right policy path, I think.
Yeah, well, is this consistent with what the House did? I mean, aside from the changes.
They do have a reduced,
I meant just the language in 2A, identify all schools.
okay, this is existing law, the way that we
Yeah, okay.
identify sparsity. And this is not creating a new construct.
So what we've done is just shrunk we've got a little bit of density, the sparsity, weight at all, and set the school has to be enough. And the only thing we have to go on is districts at this point, I think.
So I just might propose that we continue to work on this section with finance, because I think it's like a policy question that we don't have the tools to answer today.
We'll go to, once it gets up for finance.
Yeah.
We continue to look at it.
I also just worry that the language doesn't quite align.
Meaning,
Like, when I look at what's, struck out.
Mhm.
It says equaling population density data shall be based, unless I'm reading it wrong. I just don't know if it was quickly done and the sentence needs to just make sense better.
this right here, I think it's just.
Oh,
Yep.
equaling fewer than 50.
Exactly.
Thank you. I was like, what is it equaling?
No, I was ready
Oh,
to
great.
be
Okay.
shown that I did,
No.
Yep.
It's Friday.
that's great.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be correct.
Yes,
Can we though? Agree amongst us that what we're trying to recognize is small schools in sparse areas. Okay,
Yes.
yes,
not just small schools.
yes.
Okay,
And-
it's a
and-
factor that we're.
And that is the way the small school weight will work. It is you condition for getting a small school weight is that you fall within this category, the fewer than 55 persons per square mile.
So we really need to work on what this is gonna boil down to is line 11, line 10 and 11.
Mhm.
That's really the focal point is how do we determine that? How do we enhance, reward, weight that?
I don't think we're disagreeing, but just so I'm sincere in the future, I'm trying to make sure that I understand when we're all done, let's say, I don't know this to be true, but let's say Canaan doesn't meet the sparsity standard and that's where the school is. But every other town around it is extremely sparse and they're the ones sending the kids to the relatively small school. I want to make sure we're understanding how the relationship works.
Yeah.
So
I
that,
agree.
okay,
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Articulated.
I'm sorry, Canaan, if I got that wrong, but
On page 54, you're seeing the same small school restriction to fewer than 100 pupils. Again, we're just in the counting pupils in these categories.
And if I can highlight one thing, Ezra sent out a file a couple days ago listed for all of us are sparse, small schools. Small schools in sparse areas. This
That's-
just for our own.
Yeah, Joint Fiscal Office, Esther Holbert, just to point out, not every school there was necessarily, I don't think, a small school. It was every school in a sparse area. So
Okay.
there could
That's
be,
good stuff.
can I add something to that? I think the reason this is really important too is I wasn't paying attention to the importance of schools up to 250 kids as opposed to up to 100 because we could be we could be punishing efficiency. They could be in a sparse area but have achieved a slightly bigger school, but they're surrounded by sparsity. And they probably still need the weight because they've managed to accumulate all the kids to like slightly bigger school than 100, if that makes sense.
That's my sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so I agree. I'm not even sure the 100.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We can jump next to the actual weights themselves. So I'm on page 55. And again, you're just going to see these numbers tracking what you've seen Ezra present on that scenario C. So grade level weights are your first subdivision 1, 0.02 for that 6th through 8th grade levels, 0.10 for grades 9 through 12. You maintain the same economic disadvantage weight. That's that 1.02. For the EL weight, and again, if we're making those changes for EL differentiation, this subdivision will be changed. But right now you have that 1.40 figure from the scenario C.
Ask a quick question on that again. So if we just keep this number for now, we can go back next session and put in weighting. As long as we pull it through.
You can do whatever you want. Next time.
Right. Yes, all right.
Why I'd asked that we
Do it now.
do it now is because it's such a big difference for the district to actually have these students. Because it's such a wide range. Like if you don't speak English at all, or you're,
Point taken.
a newcomer from England, like it's gonna be really different, so.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about page 54? I wonder if, like, I can just leave it alone, but if people are with me enough to worry that we might actually be hurting the efficient small schools that have collected all the students from their area, similarly to what I just said about English learners. I'm worried that we have cut out the 100 to 250 range schools.
Was there not a sliding scale that takes that into consideration that was in the presentation yesterday?
There was a variable formula for
Yeah.
the 100 to 250. I will note the math doesn't work, but
Which math doesn't work? Like
The
our
vari-
weird math that we
the
can-
variable formula, I mean, there's a way to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Why doesn't it work? I'm just,
It produces negative numbers. Where it is not intending to.
and this is from the, this is from the experts that are supposed to APA. These were the numbers from APA.
It's possible that, yeah, this is just, and I don't know if it's helpful to call on Ezra here, because we were doing these calculations on the sideline yesterday, but,
Do the other numbers work? I mean, it's a,
well, just to call, when when I say don't work, let me be clear as to what I mean. It's meant to be a sliding scale that takes you from a particular
Right.
figure in a smooth curve down to zero. And it takes you past zero. That's all that I'm saying. I am not at all speaking to the accuracy of what it's trying to measure. I just mean that the incremental way in which it moves takes you below zero. And I don't think that that's the intention, because they have a zero for those above it, right?
well, yeah, I mean, I think it begs the question then, are there concerns about how the other numbers that were presented, whether or not they work?
I
If there are
don't feel
issues.
comfortable speaking of, and I'm trying to, but this was the only of the figures that has a complicated mathematical formula, right? The others are particular figures provided to capture expected costs of producing particular outcomes, right?
Yeah.
This is the complexity of that variable weighting factor is that it's meant to provide a very smooth curve. So when I describe the mathematical issue with the curve, I'm just speaking to the fact that that complicated formula for the weight, and not speaking to the accuracy of the weight, produces odd outcomes. And I don't know if Ezra wants to offer other.
Yeah, Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office, just so to chime in on what John's saying. So from what we saw, 198 is when that mathematical formula actually hits zero. So if there was no language assigned with that weight, or if there's some sort of rounding that wasn't done in, because you have a paper memo, if there's enough trailing digits, maybe that was the problem. But at 199 students, that formula gives you a negative number, as in like a negative weight. So that's the part when John said it doesn't work. Like a school of 220 students would actually have a negative weight, which we don't think was the intent. So that's just what he means when he says it doesn't glide perfectly to 249, which we think is the intent.
Exactly. Thank you.
so I think the safest thing for us to do here is undo a little bit of what we've done in recent days. Because what I worry about, I've kind of been philosophically saying to the world that I'm more in favor of, reducing the amount of money we get to small schools just because they're small, instead of cutting the class sizes and then coming down with a hammer. But I worry that cutting out the 100 to 250 is actually cutting out the ones who are trying to be efficient in sparse areas.
Did this come from Dr. Colby? Is that where we ended up doing this?
What we got from the House was different than this.
I can show you the house. That is helpful.
What? Okay, go ahead. What would happen if we just uncross that line?
Your base would need to change.
Yeah. So that's why I'm treading carefully, but
We're looking at just the identifying schools with small districts. And I think the small school. Oh, we switched to we switched to a support grant for the small schools piece in the House version. So you weren't doing this second.
how complicated would it be to plug that back in? How long would it take to do that and take a look at it?
We can, I mean, we can have that, if that's the only calculation, we can do that today. We could do that today. Before the end of the day, but I can't give you the number of minutes.
I could go two ways, one that we just tell finance, like, kind of mess this up and, could you relook at it?
We want them to take a look at it.
And,
We said,
and not.
Okay.
I think they would definitely take a look at it. As long as we've said out loud that we might have not done what we
well,
intended here.
we'd like them to take a look at it.
Okay.
Same economic disadvantage way, we've spoken about the EL piece. You see struck language on page 56 that's highlighted. This is removing that sparsity weight. And then you have your small school weight, which again is picking up a sparsity condition. If the number of persons per square mile residing within the land area of geographic boundaries of the school district, is fewer than 55, then for each pupil listed in the counts earlier, pupils in small schools, each school district shall receive an additional weighting amount of 0.21. And then you wouldn't have, and this is what we've just been discussing, that 100 to 50. Subdivision 6 just says you're adding up all those weights to produce your weighted long-term membership. So that is the extent of picking up the changes from scenario C. I did want to note on page 58, we have an existing law, a subsection H that speaks to recalibrating the weights and the like. But that's predicated on there being a methodology behind, a duplicable methodology behind the numbers. And since we're negotiating those numbers, you wouldn't be able to recalibrate in the same way that you do under the current system. So that has been pulled. You could still, of course, revisit the numbers. It's not to say that. I will jump, unless folks have questions, to my next highlighted section, which is going to be transition across fiscal years. And I'll pause to jump to that because otherwise I'm gonna. Oh, it's not that. Okay. Section 26, up to 60. So what happens when you first roll out the foundation formula? What's going to happen to folks who are jumping from a particular level of education spending to a new educational opportunity payment? What this proposal is that in each of fiscal years 2028, 29, and 30, the EOP for that school district would equal the EOP as it would be calculated plus a yearly adjustment. And the basic idea behind this is whatever your gap is between your educational opportunity payment and your ed spending in FY25, you would increment your way in the correct direction. So if your FY25 spend was above your educational opportunity payment, you would increment your way down. You would move slowly down in the increments that you see here. So in your first year, you would get whatever the gap is, would move you 1/4 of the way there. The next year, it would move you a quarter more. The next year, a quarter more. And then it would take you at the end in fiscal year 2031 to your educational opportunity payment. And the way that the math would work here, and I hoped to have a PowerPoint that showed the way the math worked, but time did not permit. But the way that the math works here, it accounts for whether you're above or below in a really smooth way. So these mechanics produce those moving you gradually, and you can think of it as essentially a 4-year transition. Although you're referencing 3 fiscal years, in the 4th year, you're fully there. I'm happy to talk about the way.
6 weeks.
If I could. So here is a little bit of a shortcoming by not having a whole timeline of when things hit and how things are related to each other. Is it the current plan, probably in Bev's section, that the actual boundaries take effect in fiscal year
So
28,
we
27?
I think we don't know what will happen with the school district boundary. There are aspirations to do this quickly, but the more significant thing here is that the rollout of the foundation formula is that fiscal year 28, which is why you're seeing these figures. But we don't definitively know what's going to happen with the school district boundaries. And so if you pass boundaries and have wards next session, then you would have those obviously in advance of this to know. And we would have to think about at that time, do we need to backdate, or if you've consolidated districts, for instance, you would need to aggregate those FY25 ed spends, right, to have a meaningful FY25 spending level against which to compare. But it's possible that if something doesn't pass, right, there's a backup plan as to how to deal with that situation. And that rollout would affect what these numbers will be for a district. But these years are just tied to when the foundation formula is rolled out, agnostic as to what is happening with the school district boundaries.
So then this plan is what the House had planned. We're not gonna do foundation and go 80, what they were showing yesterday.
Well, I think they had a slightly longer, this is AOE, you mean, not
AOE, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
AOE, but we were gonna start with foundation formula, and whoever got more, got paid whatever you were missing, but we still went to a foundation formula. Where this is,
You're talking about their transition?
yes,
This
there's,
is a very similar concept, different time period.
okay. All right. But we are not going to the foundation formula
Yeah.
till,
The transitionary numbers are happening with the rollout of the foundation formula. So you will be in the first 3 fiscal years of the foundation formula rollout. You would be receiving an EOP that is different than the EOP as would be calculated under the foundation formula. Typically, what you would receive is an EOP plus a yearly adjustment. And when I say plus, note that the yearly adjustment can be negative. So if your FY25 is above your EOP, you get a negative adjustment and it's ticking downward. But you're in the foundation formula, and for the first 3 fiscal years, you're receiving a different figure than your EOP. And then in fiscal year 2031, you're fully on the EOP as would be calculated under the foundation.
and that's where these numbers come in, where, hey, if this was to happen next year, we'd be out 20%.
This is a 3-year plan, or 4-year plan.
I've got to rephrase my question. In the language that's in the draft bill right now, the first fiscal year for foundation formulas to take effect is 28.
Fiscal year 28 is the first year of the foundation formula. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry if I missed this, but this is probably when the supplemental spending would matter most, is when they're changing districts. How does that construct layer on top of this?
So your SDS, and so part of why you see the notwithstanding language to start this section, it's notwithstanding the definitions, because you have a definition of educational opportunity payment that is, your base multiplied by your weighted long-term membership.
Is the 100%?
And so what this does is it substitutes for the concept of EOP, whatever determination is made under this session law provision in fiscal years 28, 29, and 30. And what it means is that anything that references EOP picks up what is happening these years. So your supplemental district spending would be tied to, as currently proposed, 10% of your EOP. And the EOP that's referencing is this yearly adjusted EOP. Meaning that if your FY25 was above your EOP, you would in these years be eligible for a greater amount of supplemental district spending because you're receiving 10% of a higher number. And if your FY25 was below your EOP, in the first years you would have less SDS available than you would have if you were fully moved onto the EOP in FY28. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
The intent is for anything that references EOP to pick up the determination here. And part of why that really matters is because when you set your rates, you're setting your rates to produce this figure, right? So you can't just have transitionary measures that don't get picked up in your revenue collection. You need to make sure that whatever you're referencing is what's being raised. So that's why this modifies what counts as EOP for those 3 fiscal years.
You have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thanks, sir. So I know you answered the question earlier, maybe Beth answered the question earlier, that supplemental spending is intended to be addressed in 2026 by the Finance Committee only. And
This year.
okay, this year. Okay, so this year, but did we add it to the list on page 1? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Never mind.
I see where you're going. Yeah, I think we're okay. And we do have a concept in the draft. It's just that finance will be touching it.
Yeah, thank you.
That is the extent of the highlighted updates I have beyond showing you the effective date section, which has been live for what we're discussing here, although it is a lengthy list of. You'll note that the draft contains provisions that will be dealt with in finance, including the property tax credit repeal and the like. Those you haven't touched, but I've just maintained alignment of the effective date. So what you can see here, I'm on page 108, the very end of the draft. In July 1, 2027, so your FY 28 rollout, that tuition update that Beth talked through related to producing that base amount per student reflective of the weights would come effective at the same time that you transition to the foundation formula, and your supplemental district spending tax and statewide education tax, these changes would be put into effect. The FY 28 is the year that you're really looking at here.
Thinking about section 3, which is the task force and the fact that we'll have consultants that JFO will be working with us to hire, would it make sense to make section 3 take effect on passage?
Is it not already?
Let's see.
Oh, maybe it is.
It is.
Okay. Well, it does make sense then. We're good. Okay.
Check.
Okay. Do you guys want me to make the EL differentiation?
Yeah.
Change.
Just how, no rush. The question does not imply a rush, but when should we think about being back in the
Oh, you guys are great.
Five minutes.
I mean,
Negotiate.
hopefully I can do it in under 30, but we'll see. I mean,
Okay, so why don't we can go off, until